How's it going, everybody? This is Rob of Novakast back with another review video. And with this one, we will be talking about the final Evangelion movie. Neon Genesis Evangelion 3.0 plus 1.0 Thrice Upon a Time. 10 out of 10. And that's not a gag. Even though I'm going to show the rating by the end of this, 10 out of fucking 10. This movie not only found a really interesting way to conclude this movie series, but above all else, found a way to connect the previous media, connect the previous storyline that is the anime series for Neon Genesis Evangelion. And to an extent, everything to some degree works out. But how does that happen? And especially for characters that we've come to kind of find interesting in this show. Well, let's dive in and discuss point by point, or at least give my point by point, on why I consider Neon Genesis Evangelion 3.0 plus 1.0 Thrice Upon a Time is a 10 out of 10 rating. So, as I said before, when it comes down to this movie, it expands, actually, if anything, it expands upon what we saw for the anime series Neon Genesis Evangelion, which, again, I believe was 27 episodes. It expands on that in a really interesting way. And I guess, if anything, to discuss, the first, point by point what happens in the story. And by the way, spoilers for those who have not seen it yet, and I ask you guys to go check it out. There is a lot that goes on. First of all, it is a major character improvement, or at least character story, for the character Shinji Ikari. Somebody who, again, I don't want to go into too much of him, but he has, the story mostly focuses on the growth of this character, as well as the characters that we've, seen time and time again. And it starts off with, our three characters, Asuka, Rei, or the Rei copy, and Shinji, encountering, or at least wandering around and encountering a place called Village 3, which, by the way, turns out is a location that refugees can go and try to live their lives thanks to these anti-L barrier things that cleanse a portion of the land, which was a really cool idea. I actually really enjoyed that. So there's a possibility of, again, people being able to live or thrive. But to my other surprise, we have characters that show up who I thought were dead weren't. Like Choji, for instance, as well as Kensuke, who are now adults. Which, I mean, it goes to show too, how messed up it's been for the Eva pods, because again, they don't age. Which that actually goes into something else that occurs with another character, which I probably shouldn't talk about for till the very end. But they get to Village 3. Shinji is catatonic, especially with not just what happened, and just with him feeling responsible for another apocalyptic event, but also losing who he thought was the only friend he had at that current time, that being Karu. And it doesn't help too that a couple of times with Asuka, they notice she has the choker, which caused Karu to die. Which I will say that threw me in a loop, but they actually have a really good explanation near the very end as to why she wears the choker. And even Karu mentions the fact that it was made for him, or made to be as an opposition to him, in case something goes wrong. So after that, we have like this. For about 45 minutes or so, we have our characters interacting with the village. Well, mostly for the most part, Shinji is kind of like in the background. He is, again, for the most part, catatonic after what happened. Rei, who has never experienced life, or at least the Rei copy, who has never experienced life outside of the facility of Nerve, gets to experience life for the first time, experiencing people, experiencing animals, experiencing, like, just having all these different experiences and emotions, which, unfortunately, after Shinji starts to kind of snap out of it, and by the way, it's done in a really, really tasteful way, especially with, for the most part, even though Toji, who, by the way, is a doctor, I kind of thought that was funny, and Kensuke, who apparently was a survivalist, especially for the main series, is not only an individual who, goes out and makes sure that, their resources are kept in check, but also is a liaison to a organization called Credit. I think it was called Credit. That is kind of like the supplier, or the group that supplies or brings supplies to, the villages as well as the refugee camps. So all in all, they and Ville, I think it's Ville, basically help run all of that. Which, again, it's really cool. It is so cool. Especially, like, after what we saw for number 3. Like, actual thriving, villages of people, doing what they can to survive. And kind of live as much of a happy life as they can. Because at this point, especially with these, these cores, or the whatever's happening to the planet, everybody is being turned into these, creatures, or mock Avas as they call them in the movie. But anyways, going further than that, after this whole village arc, I should say, Yonder arrives at near the village, where Asuka and Shinji, which, quick thing I should mention too, at some point there's this whole thing with, again, Rei, or the version of Rei that we're seeing, living life for the first time, but unfortunately there's this realization that she can't live outside or away from Nerve, and unfortunately there is a moment where she ends up dying, or at least that version of her, and I will say it was sad, especially with a character who got to experience life for the first time, just immediately pass away. I will say that was a really sad moment, and probably hit hard for Shinji, but I think he afterwards realized that he had to do something, and it shows more and more as we see him near the very end of the movie. Both him and Asuka go to Yonder, where which, by the way, there's a funny scene where Shinji tells Asuka that he's coming with her. He's like, okay, yeah, but I got a role for you. Pulls out a fucking taser, which I thought was funny. He wakes up in a medical bed where he's slapped by, was it Sakura or Hikari? Hikara? I think it was Hikara, who is Toji's younger sister, which I don't think I mentioned that. Yeah, because, on Yonder, Toji's sister, or the younger sister, is working as one of the medics. Something I totally forgot. And she's upset because the reason she slaps Shinji is because he got into an Eva, and apparently she asked him specifically not to pilot an Eva. So now that they have Asuka, Shinji, and Mari, they decide to make one last stand against Gendo and Nerve. Because at this point, Gendo is trying to reactivate Unit 13. And in this current time, there is not much they can do now but fight. So what they end up doing is releasing these pods that apparently were set up as carriers for the variety of different plant life or wildlife that was once on the planet, and launch it, or kind of jettison it into space till everything was done and over with. After that, they end up going towards where Nerve HQ is going, which is literally the epicenter of the second impact, basically where it all started, where everything started. And with the help of Asuka and Mari, they're able to take down quite a bit of these mock Evas, which, by the way, the fight itself looks really cool. And afterwards, they get a chance to, or at least Asuka gets the chance to try to take down the Mark, or Unit 13. But for some reason, her Eva won't allow her to do it. It won't allow her to basically attack or destroy Unit, or actually, if anything, disable Unit 13. In fact, as they mentioned, because what ends up happening is an AT field, or at least like kind of like the force field that they create, stands between the Unit 13 and Unit 2. And Asuka thinks that it's the Eva that's causing it, that it's scared of Unit 13. So, because of this, she decides to make one feral swoop to try to destroy Unit 13. And we finally see why she's wearing the choker. It turns out that she didn't fully recover from the Unit 3 attack, or the 9th Angel attack. In fact, her body was infected with angel DNA, or angel blood. So what she ends up doing is removing this eye patch that she's been wearing for the last 2 movies, or this movie and the last one, and she pulls out one of those barrier thing. Like it's a condensed version, but it's one of those barrier things that we've been seeing that help basically create livable areas for humanity. And in some sense, this was basically kind of keeping the transformation of her becoming an angel at bay. And because of her being an angel, the Eva itself also becomes an angel. And with that strength, she tries to destroy Unit 13. However, and unfortunately, Unit 13 activates, killing or destroying Unit 2, and going further than that, because it needs 2 pilots, which they are apparently already have one of them, that being Rei, or at least if Gendo, proceeds to take Asuka as the second pilot to create the 4th impact. Which, after that, he then goes into an area, I guess a location, or another dimension called the negative dimension, or anti-dimension, which, at this point, everybody's like, oh, we're screwed. There's no way we're going to be able to fight this, or stop this from happening. Which then, Shinji, in some degree, or at least not some major, no conflicting thoughts about it whatsoever, just says flat out, tells everybody, I'm going to pilot Unit 1. Which, a couple people who've been hurt by the 3rd impact are willing to kill him in order to stop him from piloting the Eva, knowing that this may cause another, mass destruction or apocalyptic event. But Misato, trusting him, proceeds to let him do what he needs to do. Which, by the way, they gave him his old plug suit, which, I'm going to be perfectly honest, it would have been great if they would have given him a new one. But at the same time, it's what he's going to wear for his last fight. So, in a sense, it's okay. I'm not going to gripe on it too much. So, with the help of Mari and her Unit 8, which, by the way, I was always confused about that, whether it was Unit 8 or Unit 9. But all in all, it was Unit 8. Proceed to go into the anti-dimension to try to stop Gendo. But apparently, with some kind of shenanigans, and kind of like the same thing, like what happened with the first movie, or the third movie, where he had a kind of communication with Rey. He calls out to Rey, who apparently, this entire time, has been piloting Unit 1, or at least has been inside Unit 1. And with her help, he's able to take command of Unit 1 once again, reactivates it, and with the power of with the power of him, I guess, activating and awakening Unit 1, it's able to grow new limbs because it lost, an arm and both its legs. And the fight between Unit 1 and Unit 13 begins. Now, I'm going to say this what happens after this is kind of trippy. Especially with certain things. And I had to laugh because it got me thinking a little bit of the final segment. Which, by the way, before I go into this, there's elements from the previous show. Like, as I said before, it ties into the show, and probably end of Evangelion. But more importantly, it really dives into, like, kind of shares elements from that. We start with a fight where, I guess for part of the fight, we have moments where Unit 1 and Unit 13 are, like, in a large city, but it turns out it's not actually a large city. It's a stage, which it took me a second to realize it as I'm watching the movie. And by the way, they mostly use CG in this section, which it was odd because for the last movies, especially with a lot of action, they would use 2D, but I'm not going to gripe to it too much. I just thought it was weird. But yeah, like for part of the fight, or at least for all of it, it seems like it's just a stage, which was interesting. Because they go through, as Gendo kind of puts it, during their combat, they basically go through areas that are memories or well known to Shinji. So in the giant cityscape, they fight there. In apparently the Central Dogma, in freaking Masato's kitchen or dining room, and a variety of other locations. It was interesting. It was interesting to see this, but it soon ultimately it's discovered that the battle itself, or the final fight, isn't a battle of wit or a battle of might. It's a battle of wit and conversation, which I should add to, because again, this story is what completes Shinji's story, as well as gives Shinji closure, but not just Shinji, Gendo as well. Because we find out that Gendo is not so different from Shinji. We get a lot of backstory, because especially with Gendo for the original series, he was very cloak and dagger. But we find out that there is something similar to Gendo that has been displayed with Shinji. Gendo has been a character who apparently has always been closed off. He never wants to talk to people. Kind of reminds me of myself to some extent. But all in all, he likes to close himself of the world. But because of his wife, because of Yui, which is Shinji's mom, he began to not only feel emotion, but when he loses her, understands the value of loss and pain, and ultimately what loneliness actually feels like. To the point where, it shows that he ended up creating the Rey series and doing a variety of other atrocities to make his wish to see Yui again. And to some degree, he realizes what he did wrong. He realizes that with all of his vanity, with all his greed, with all of his, just his goals, the thing that he should have been worrying about was his own son. And he realized, near the very end, realizes that he failed in that aspect. And there's this really nice shot where, for a moment, they show the moment where he's walking away from the train station, leaving Shinji, but he turns around and goes back to his son and holds his son, hugs his son, saying that he's sorry. And for the last, like, one of the last shots we see of him is basically him stepping out of the train. That kind of like the train that we've seen time and time again. The train doors closing and leaving him. Now, something else too, there's a lot of elements that are brought into, because I keep mentioning that there are elements that are brought from the show, as well as a lot of elements from the end of Evangelion, and that being Lilith, or at least the final form of Lilith. And oh my god. Oh my god. Where do I begin with Lilith? I guess, okay, so obviously it's supposed to look like Rei, or Yui, or Ayanami, either way. Something they did something really odd, and to an extent, I love it, because it's creepy. So, not only did they use CG, not only did, okay, so 2D animation, really good. 3D animation, fucking excellent. The use of realistic imagery, or if anything, having like an actual person's face plastered on the oversized Lilith was fucking terrifying. In a good way. Honestly, it was unsettling, and to an extent, I'm like, this is odd, and it is a total what the fuck moment. And I think that's what they were going for, like, literally, because when we first see Lilith, or at least the oversized version of Lilith, that is another, like, what the fuck moment in the series. And sure enough, they pull that off. That was a major what the fuck moment. When you see the human realistic eyes, as well as the human realistic face with the 2D animated hair plastered onto the 2D animated or 3D animated freaking Lilith body. That was excellent. I fucking love it. But anyways, with everything going on too, I should probably mention that I guess how it's explained what Gendo's true plan was. He wanted to kill the gods, or kill the gods that created the angels, and stop all of this from happening anymore. And to do that, he needed, the human instrumentality project. But with everything, he needed every spear, because we had the spear of Longinus and the spear of Cassius that was used to stop, at least the angels. And he wanted to collect every spear that he could in order to stop or kill the gods. But little did he know, thanks to the help of, good friends of Shinji, as well as Ritsuko and Misato, they use a portion of the ship, or at least the spinal column, as they called it, to create a brand new spear, which I think they called it the Spear of Gebet, which is supposedly the spear of hope, the spear of willpower, and basically, the ultimate spear that will stop all of this from happening. So what ends up happening is actually really cool. So Gendo, they are able to deliver the spear, which, by the way, within this, with the sacrifice of Misato, which I will say, I love Misato's character, and to an extent, how she went out is honestly something that can be remembered, especially with everything on the line. Her last acts of heroism was great. I adored her as a character, which I didn't talk about her that much when I was doing my reviews, but no joke, I absolutely love this character. And there's even more to her that I didn't talk about, which I don't want to spoil too much, because there is a lot that this character ends up having to go through, especially when it comes down to, I guess, holding on to the burdens of what's happened. But in the end, she dies, Mari is able to deliver the spear to help Shinji. And Gendo is, I think, with the power of conversation, of having a conversation with his son, apparently, he subsides. He kind of goes on his way. And with basically Shinji still in the anti-dimension, he's able to free Asuka, who apparently I think it's kind of set up where she may have had a crush on Kensuke. I could be wrong. I could be wrong on that, but that's what I felt like. Like what I kind of, some of the hints that were kind of set up. Because, by the way, for the village arc, as I'm calling it, Shinji, Asuka, and are basically staying with Kensuke. And there is a good rapport between Asuka and Kensuke. It's actually really great. And they also delve into a bit, by the way, while they're in the anti-dimension, they delve a little bit more into Asuka's character, which is something that was already mentioned in the show. This is a character who always wanted to try to prove herself, always wanted to praise, and always wanted to be the center of attention. But to an extent where she felt like she was being neglected, which to some degree there may have been, because there's also hints in the manga where apparently her mother suffered from some kind of mental breakdown, and at that point she felt like she wasn't getting the attention she needed, which to an extent for a child, that's something that would be very traumatic. Now, going further than that, again, it seems like for this movie they set up a kind of good rapport between Kensuke and Asuka. In fact, when Shinji frees Asuka, which, by the way, they have a good moment, because there's a point too, which I almost forgot, where before Asuka and Mari go into combat, they have a conversation. They actually have a good conversation. We actually see a little bit as to how much Shinji has grown up. And there's a bit in number 3 where Asuka punches a glass window that separated her and Shinji. And she talks about how she's been holding this emotion for like years. And she asks him, you know why I punched you? And Shinji kind of gives a good answer. He's like, you wanted to punch me because I couldn't save you and I couldn't kill you. And she talks about how, you know, she liked his box lunches and she may have had a crush on him. Which, by the way, I think it's set up really, really well, or set up in a very interesting way, that apparently Mari has the hots for Shinji, which I thought was funny. And I will say it was something I wouldn't expect, especially with her kind of being very playful, which, by the way, still, favorite character is Mari. I fucking love that character. But all in all, going back to Shinji saving Asuka, he mentions how he kind of liked her too, and to an extent look after Kensuke, and he frees her. After that, we have a moment where Shinji then rescues Rei, which, by the way, a couple times I was looking up images for my review. I did not there was this couple of times where I've seen this long-haired Rei, and I never got that. Like, wait, does she have long hair in this movie? Sure enough, she does, and that was something I forgot to talk about. She has, apparently, with her being while she's been in the pod for almost 14 to 15 years, her hair grew out, which I thought was an interesting thing to do for her. But either way, so to some degree, we have Rei being freed by Shinji, who Shinji talks about how he wants to create a brand new world for everyone, a world away from basically vacant from Ava's, which again is a really cool idea. And they hint, by the way, really cool thing on their part. They hint at, or they, if anything, a screen or a monitor turns on, and or a projector. There we go. And in the projector, we see scenes from the original series, which I thought was great. I fucking loved it. It was good. It was a good callback. And going further than that, we have a closure with Karu, who, by the way, through everything, we find out that this isn't the first time that Karu and Shinji have met. And they even reference that where you see Karu sitting on the angel statue. That this isn't the first time that this has happened, where they have dealt with the angels, the Ava, the Instrumentality Project, everything. It's shown, again, just so beautifully that it's basically, it's been history repeating itself over and over again until they got it right. And sure enough, it seems like this time they may have gotten it right. And by the end of it, with the spear, and everybody basically being freed and kind of given a chance to live again, Shinji almost is about to make the ultimate sacrifice, where he takes the spear and is about to stab himself, basically removing Ava's from their point of reality, or any reality for that matter. But he's stopped from doing it, and is kind of pushed away. And it turns out the person who pushed him away, even though he doesn't realize it at first, is his mom, Yui. And not only that, but he realizes that with the help of Gendo, like this is ultimately what Gendo wanted. Gendo wanted to say goodbye to Yui. And sure enough, to an extent, with him, I guess, apparently still being inside Unit 13, he gets his wish. Yui controlling Unit 1, Gendo controlling Unit 13, stab both of the Avas with the newly formed Gebbet spear, which causes a chain reaction that destroys not just their Avas, but every Ava and angel in existence, or that has been in any existence. When we get closer to the end, we have a moment where Shinji is, before I say that, everybody who has been absorbed by the Human Instrumentality Project is freed. They're turned back to normal, and we see all these people kind of floating from the sky, which I will say is a really cool image. I love it. It was a cool image. By the end of it, the skies are clear. The oceans have apparently been purified. The pods that were basically used as arcs for the life that was, present before the second impact is, dropped back to Earth, where those animals can, thrive, or plants can thrive. And for the last moments, we have a moment where Shinji is basically just sitting at a beach. And they did this thing, which I kind of laughed, because I think this is something, I think they kind of knew that they were going to they might get a laugh out of this, because a lot of people shit on this for the previous show. And this is when they, what they end up doing, because you see the ocean, and you see Shinji just sitting there. And for the most part, it goes from, the final animation to rough draft to storyboard, and then just stills. All in all, it was a funny situation to see. And for a couple of the last shots, we see Mari show up with Unit 8, and with its purpose being fulfilled, Unit 8 disappears, and Mari and Shinji kind of, meet up with each other. Now, I want to talk, the final moment of the episode is intriguing. Because by the end of it, we see Shinji, who I'm going to assume, is now an adult. So, thanks to, them, removing Ava's from any plane of existence or existing at all, Shinji was able to grow up. We have a moment where we see Rei and Karu together, and Shinji is basically sitting at a train station waiting for a train, and Mari surprises him. They kind of flirt a little bit and proceed to hold hands as they go and see the world, or at least see what's going on. And that's how the movie ends. Panning off, which, by the way, I think is more realistic shots of... And it took me a second because I had to look again, which I might be wrong, but I think for the last bit, they use animation from, character animations, but the environment, the environment that they show is the realistic, Japan. Using camera work and basically kind of panning off to the sky. That's good. That was actually really good. I actually really, really, really freaking enjoyed that. And the movie ends. All in all, I'm going to say, when it comes down to story itself, it really, really cuts all the loose ends. It really... and when it comes to all the situations that have occurred with our characters, everything is resolved. Our character, who basically a lot of people loathed, has gone through a long and just agonizing adventure. If anything, well, actually, I guess adventure wouldn't be the right word. A journey. I guess it's the same thing, but at the same time, he's gone through so much heartache, so much trauma, and above all, has grown to be a better person for it. And I think that's the most important thing when it comes down to this story is, and this is something that I always say, is because a lot of people, they pull this, certain aspects of the character is what matters. No. What the character does in the story, and ultimately how the story builds them up. And I think, if anything, there's something that I've noticed, especially with a lot of movies. Pain builds a character. A lot of people want to pull this BS where characters are way overpowered, they can't be hurt, they can't do any wrong, but that's not a character. It just seems like a stereotype of a character. If anything, it's just something that is non-existent to a character, I should say, where there's no character that just built this the strong character, nothing can happen to them, nothing can hurt them, but there's no depth to that character. Shinji Ikari, this story again builds this character through pain and loss and suffering, and again, even though with so much things that have happened to him, so much horrible things, he's stronger for it. And I think ultimately that's what matters. What we've gotten to see this character go through, or at least what our characters have gone through, and how stronger they are because of it, is what makes this story great. That's, I think, ultimately, if there's anything that to talk about, is what our characters go through in this story. And it is done so well. I absolutely enjoyed this last chapter of this film, or film series. So for characters, I want to talk about Shinji first, because again, this is, or actually, if anything, talk about Gendo as well as Shinji. So, as I said in the story segment, it's really made apparent that Gendo is, in a sense, or if anything, Shinji is sort of a reflection of Gendo and what Gendo has experienced with his life. But unfortunately, due to some of his greed, his ambitions, basically made history repeats itself through Shinji. And unfortunately, that, to a large degree, is depressing, to say the least. But Shinji himself, as a character, as much as people have shit on him in the past, has grown. I mean, at the beginning of the film, he starts off as, again, somebody who has been dealt such a terrible hand, has gone through so many traumatic experiences, and at this point is catatonic due to his own, just him wanting to do good, proceeding, being used as something to do evil. At the beginning of this film, he's broken. He is broken because of what has happened, how he's been used, and so on. But over time, especially with Kensuke kind of giving him space, which to an extent, I will mention that Toji kind of like says that that the character shouldn't be doing that, but Kensuke is like, no, he needs this. He needs to be left alone. And sure enough, that's what he needed, because then eventually he was able to, and by the way, with the help of Rei, before she kicked the bucket, or at least the copy Rei, is able to kind of start slowly but surely acclimate to, basically trying to live life. And he gets to experience that with Kensuke, which I thought was pretty cool. Where, again, Kensuke is a character who is a survivalist and helps by, checking the perimeters as well as checking their resources, or their natural resources, which was good. Which I will say I liked that aspect of that character, Kensuke. They gave him a lot of depth, and more so with what we see of him in this final film. Now, Toji, quickly talking about Toji, who, again, started off as a bully, somebody who acts, tough, became a doctor. An adult man that became a doctor. And it's clear, too, that he mentions that, with everything that has happened, they've done things that they don't, consider as right. In fact, Toji clearly says that he did some things that he wasn't proud of, only to not just protect himself, but to protect his family. But above all, is better for it. Which I think is something that kind of, to a certain degree, Shinji kind of holds to himself as, we see further in the story. Asuka, again, is a character who I think is another person that has suffered from, either neglect or a person who basically strives from attention. We've seen that numerous times, not just with the anime series, but also the movie series, where, to a degree, and she's somewhat similar to Shinji, and I guess in any aspect, she's known Shinji before, but at the same time, she's a person who craves on attention. Even though she claims she wants to be left alone, she always wants attention. And I will say that her character is, has a drastic change with the third and second, or not the second, but the third and fourth movie. And it shows more with this one, especially with, again, her rapport with Kensuke. And how, I guess, if anything, when it comes down to, just to give this perspective, I have to look at the movie again, but when we see her and Kensuke, not once do I ever hear her badmouth him or call him an idiot. More so with Shinji, but for the most part, does not give any negative vibes to Kensuke. And they kind of set this up where there is, again, a good rapport with those two. Now, talking about Rei, they do a lot with her. Or at least the version of her that we see, or did see with the third film, which unfortunately, unfortunately with that character or that version of Rey, she does not get to, live life at the fullest. Only get to experience it with the time that she had, which is sad. But they did a lot with Rey, and I actually really enjoyed that, especially with the moments of her. There were some cute moments with her, more so with when she's again having all these experiences kind of placed in front of her, where people say goodbye, good morning, hello, thank you, holding hands, and working, which I thought was great, where you see her helping people plant rice and doing a variety of other tasks. It was good. I enjoyed this little snippet of kind of giving humanity to this character. It was great, and it helps too that, especially with the Rey, the Rey that we knew from the first two films, is basically brought back to some degree. Although sent back to a new world, but at the same time, she's brought back. Now, Misato is again a character who has been, like Shinji and a variety of the other characters, has been through a lot. I wanted to kind of bring her up too, especially Ritsuko, and it's clear that these two characters have gone through a lot. More so with Misato, who we find out what happened to Kaji, her boyfriend, or the person that she was madly in love with, that he sacrificed himself. Not only does she feel remorse about what happened to Kaji, but to an extent feels remorse about what she had to do in terms of other people that she had in her life. Especially with spoilers, you find out that apparently her and Kaji had a son who works in the Credit Foundation. And ever since he was born, she has kind of given no contact to her son. And it shows how much, I guess, devotion she has to finishing this fight between not just the Avas, but the Angels and Nerve. So in that degree, it's especially with her, you can admire her, but also mourn her, especially for what happens to her at the very end of her journey. All in all, characters themselves, they go through a lot. And I was going to talk, by the way, for those who were wondering, I was going to talk about Mari, but I've talked about her so much. She's basically, I adore that character. She's probably, again, my favorite out of every character that we see in this series. She's my favorite. I absolutely love this character when she's on screen. And more so towards the end. Because again, there's an excellent rapport that is set up, or I guess relationship, that is set up with her and Shinji, as we've seen for the latest film. Now, all in all, characters, they have gone through, and I'm talking about characters not just for this last film, but going on talking about the other four films. Our characters that we've seen and come to experience through these films have gone through a long and destructive journey. And a lot of them, although scarred, are able to live happier lives because of the experiences that they had to go through. More so, again, with Shinji, who has gone through so much trauma, so much dread, so much heartache, that he becomes a better person because of it. And like I said before, when it comes down to story and building up a character, sometimes a character is built through pain and what they go through. Because ultimately they can understand what pain is and not only find a way to prevent it, but help others that go through it as well. So all in all, characters themselves were excellent, and just overall, especially with the four films, got better and better as time progressed. So this is going to be an interesting section because overall, I've always said, especially when it comes to these films, that the animation itself has been phenomenal. 2D animation is done really well as the blend of 3D animation and the usage of again, realistic imagery. Like, for instance, the creepy Lilith, the ultimate what the fuck moment in this whole series is done really well. Especially with the final shot of the film, where we see our two characters, Shinji and Mari, leaving the train station, and basically it seems like it's actual overview of the city, like a city in Japan, and it panning off to, you know, the sky, which again, it's done really well. I absolutely enjoyed it. And I have to say, once again, the thing that really shines above all is when we see the fights. I absolutely love a lot of the fights that we see, or combat sections that we see for Neon Genesis Evangelion. And above all, this doesn't disappoint with those. There were a lot of cool fights, and I think, if anything, a couple of my favorites would have to be during the final assault, when we have Unit 2 and Unit 8 fighting off against the mock Avas. All in all, that looks really cool. And then, let's not forget the first fight that we see with Mach 8 fighting off against some more of the Avas when they're in the Paris branch for Nerve to try to find parts for the Avas. And going further than that, the final fight between Unit 13 and Unit 1 is also very excellent. I absolutely enjoyed that. Especially, again, with the fact that as they're fighting, it seems like they're just on a set. It was cool, and I loved it. It made me laugh as I'm watching it. But all in all, the use of animation, either CG, 3D, or, if anything, realistic imagery, was done really well, especially, again, with everything that was going on, was done excellently, and I absolutely enjoyed it. And I think, if anything, there's not much I could say after that, other than, yeah, it's fucking brilliant. As per usual, music itself is also done really well, or especially for the scores, as well as, you know, music for the subtle moments. Very good blend of, you know, score and orchestra, as well as other songs used, especially for instance, the moment when Lilith activates or is brought into our plane of existence, or their plane of existence, to try to turn everybody into cores. And then finally, something I haven't talked about at all, as far as I know, I haven't talked about, and I could be wrong, but it sounds like the artist that I was thinking of. The music is done by Otada Hikaru for the credit music, and above all, the songs played or created, I think, if anything, or just played, are really really good and kind of fitting, especially when it comes down to each experience for each film. So when it comes to the composers or everybody that was working at the music, you guys did good, and I absolutely enjoyed the music, especially when it, you know, starts playing for moments that I really enjoy for this film. Mostly for the, you know, battle scenes, because again, I freaking love the combat sections of this movie. Although I've already kind of given my reasons for a 10 out of 10 rating, I think I might as well just kind of give them again, or at least give them here, and then kind of give my rating again. So, Neon Genesis Evangelion 3.0 and 3.0 plus 1.0 really kind of ties the loose ends when it comes down to Neon Genesis Evangelion. And at the same time, not only referencing some of the old works, but ties it together as to connecting what we saw for not just the 27 episode anime series, but as well as connecting the stories of that universe and the one that we saw for this movie series. Everything above all is done really well. Our characters, who, again, for some of them we may have not liked, have grown to be better characters as time has progressed. Music itself has been done really well when it comes to moments that need it. And animation, above all else, has been excellent throughout all of the films that have been created for this series. So, with that being said, once again, even though I have already given it, this is a phenomenal film, at least for me. I know some people, you can look at it and not like it, but for me, this was a phenomenal film. I enjoyed it, and I think in the end, it is a good way to end the series in a very interesting way. So, with that being said, Neon Genesis Evangelion 3.0 plus 1.0 Thrice Upon a Time receives my highest marks, 10 out of 10. I enjoyed this film. It is worth that rating. If you guys don't like it, that's fine. Again, this is only opinion based. If you guys have not seen the film, go watch it. In fact, the way I was able to watch it was Amazon Prime exclusive. So if you haven't watched it, go check it out. It is a good way to close the series. And with that, I'm going to end the video here. Thank you guys for checking out my very long review of Neon Genesis Evangelion 3.0 plus 1.0 Thrice Upon a Time. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. If you guys can, please leave a like, comment, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. If you guys want to follow us on social media, links are in the description down below, as well as check out our daily content and the weekly podcast. With that being said, this is Rob Novakast signing off. Have a good one. Take care, and I will see you guys in the next video.